David had always dreamed of living in a peaceful neighborhood where he could come home from work, sit back, and enjoy his own space without trouble. After years of saving and careful planning, that dream finally became real. He bought a house with a wide backyard, green grass, and most importantly, a shining blue pool. The pool was not just a place to swim. It was a symbol of his effort and patience. Every time David looked at it, he felt proud of how far he had come. When he first moved in, the neighborhood looked welcoming. Families were outside mowing lawns, children played with bikes on the street, and friendly greetings were exchanged here and there. David liked how calm it seemed compared to the busy city life he was used to. For the first week, everything felt smooth. He unpacked his belongings, set up his furniture, and even had a small cookout in the backyard to celebrate the new beginning. But there was one neighbor who caught his attention quickly. Her name was Karen. She was part of the HOA, the Homeowners Association, and she carried herself as if she had full authority over every person who lived there. She walked around with papers in her hands, pointing at fences, lawns, and gardens, telling people how things should look. Her voice was loud, and she often reminded others that rules keep the community perfect. David tried not to judge her too quickly. He believed that everyone had their own personality, and as long as she did not cause problems for him, he would stay polite. However, Karen's eyes told another story. Almost every time David went into his backyard, he noticed her passing by and staring at the pool. She would stop, fold her arms, and look longer than seemed normal. Sometimes she would even smile to herself before walking away. At first, David thought she was only curious because he was new in the area. But a small feeling inside warned him that something was not right. One Saturday morning, David walked outside to clean the pool. The sun was shining, and the water sparkled under the light. As he moved closer, something unusual caught his eye. There were wet footprints near the poolside. At first, he thought maybe some rain had left marks, but the sky had been clear all night. He looked at the footprints again. They were fresh, and there were drops of water leading away from the pool toward the side gate. David bent down and touched the marks. They were real. He quickly checked the pool water and noticed it was not as calm as it usually was. The small waves suggested someone had been inside not too long ago. He looked around the backyard, but no one was there. The gate was still locked, or at least it looked locked. Confused, he shook his head and told himself it might have been kids from the neighborhood who had somehow managed to sneak in. He did not want to overthink. The next morning, the same thing happened. When he stepped out to relax by the pool, he noticed a towel lying near the edge. It was not his. The footprints were there again. This time, he felt sure it was not random kids. Whoever it was had come more than once, and they were bold enough to leave things behind. David decided to ask around. He spoke to a few neighbors, asking if anyone had seen kids jumping over fences or running into yards. Most of them shook their heads. One neighbor, an older man named Tom, gave him a strange look. Tom hesitated for a moment and then said, "You might want to keep an eye on Karen. She likes to act like she owns everything around here." David raised his eyebrows. "You think she might be coming into my pool?" Tom shrugged. "I don't want to say too much, but she has been caught before acting like people's backyards are public property. Just be careful." That evening, David could not shake the thought from his mind. Karen was on the HOA board, but could she really be sneaking into his pool? The idea seemed ridiculous, yet the clues kept pointing towards something strange. 2 days later, David got his answer. He returned home early from work, planning to take a quick swim before dinner. As he walked into his backyard, he froze. There, in the pool, was Karen herself. She was floating on one of his pool chairs, eyes closed, enjoying the water as if it belonged to her. For a moment, David stood silently, not believing what he saw. Karen had not noticed him yet. She was humming softly, relaxing like she had been doing it for weeks. The nerve of it stunned him. Finally, David cleared his throat loudly. Karen opened her eyes, and when she saw him, she gasped. But instead of apologizing, she quickly tried to make herself look calm. "Oh David, I was just checking the pool for safety. You know, HOA rules require inspections sometimes." David stared at her. "You mean to tell me you broke into my backyard and used my pool because of HOA rules?" Karen laughed nervously and waved her hand. "Don't be so serious. It is just a pool. It is not a big deal. Besides, you're new here. I thought you would not mind sharing. I have been under stress, and the water helps me relax." David's jaw tightened. He could hardly believe her boldness. She had not only invaded his property but was now trying to excuse it as if it were normal. He knew if he let this slide, it would only continue. That night, David sat inside his living room, thinking about what to do. He did not want to create drama with the HOA, but he also could not allow Karen to keep breaking into his yard. The pool was his. He had paid for it, cleaned it, and maintained it. He could not enjoy it peacefully if someone else kept sneaking in whenever they wanted. A plan started forming in his mind. He decided that the next time Karen came into his pool, he would make sure she regretted it. Not through anger or violence, but by showing her that her actions had consequences she could not escape. And so, the game between David and Karen had only just begun. After the shocking scene of Karen floating in his pool, David felt restless for days. He had tried to stay calm, but the way she brushed off her actions kept replaying in his mind. It was not just about swimming. It was about respect, privacy, and trust. If she could enter his yard without permission, what else might she do? David decided to take the first step toward protecting his space. He installed a small camera in the corner of his backyard, angled toward the pool. It was not hidden very well, but it blended enough with the plants to avoid quick notice. He hoped this would give him proof if Karen tried again. That very night, his suspicion became reality. David had gone to bed early, but around midnight, the sound of splashing water reached his ears. He sat up, shocked. He knew it was too late for children to be playing outside. Quietly, he grabbed his phone and checked the camera feed. There she was again, Karen moving through the water with ease, as if she owned the place. David's hands tightened around his phone. The boldness was unbelievable. Not only was she trespassing, but she was doing it in the middle of the night. He could see her relaxing in the pool, floating around without a care. For her, this was clearly not the first time. The next morning, David confronted her politely. He approached her while she was watering her front yard. "Karen, I know you've been using my pool at night. I have footage. This has to stop." Karen froze for a moment, then turned with a forced smile. "Footage? Really, David, you should not spy on your neighbors. Besides, it is only a pool. It does not hurt anyone. You should be happy someone enjoys it." David took a deep breath, trying not to lose his patience. "It is not about the pool. It is about respect for someone else's property. I am asking you clearly. Do not enter my backyard again. Karen's smile faded slightly, but her tone stayed confident. You are new here, David. You do not understand how this neighborhood works. The HOA values sharing. If you keep acting this way, people will not like it. With that, she turned back to her plants, as if the conversation was over. David stood there, stunned by her arrogance. She was not only refusing to stop but was now threatening him with HOA pressure. Later that evening, David called Tom, the older neighbor who had hinted about Karen's habits. He explained what was happening. Tom sighed. I am not surprised. Karen has done this before. She used another neighbor's garden for her own vegetables until they had to fence it off. The problem is, she uses her position in the HOA to scare people. Most folks just stay quiet to avoid drama. David nodded slowly. So she thinks she can get away with it because no one challenges her. That is right, Tom said. But if you want her to stop, you need to be smart. Do not confront her with anger. Show her that her actions have consequences she cannot talk her way out of. That advice stayed in David's mind. He realized that direct warnings would not work. Karen thrived on control and intimidation. If he wanted to end this, he had to use her own arrogance against her. Over the next week, David prepared quietly. He adjusted the camera angles to get clearer evidence, and he even added a motion light near the pool. The first time Karen returned at night, the light snapped on instantly. She froze in the water, startled like a thief caught red-handed. But instead of leaving, she laughed and waved at the camera, as if mocking him. The next morning, she slipped a letter into David's mailbox. It had the HOA logo on top and read, as a reminder, homeowners are expected to maintain community spirit. Refusing to share resources may lead to complaints being filed. David read it twice, shaking his head. It was not an official warning, but a note written by Karen herself, trying to scare him. Now he was certain she would not stop until she was forced to. So he set his plan in motion. First, he collected a week's worth of video clips showing Karen sneaking into the pool. The recordings were clear, showing her climbing the gate, swimming, and even leaving towels behind. Second, he checked the HOA guidelines carefully. Nowhere did it say neighbors had the right to use each other's property. In fact, the rules clearly stated that trespassing was not allowed and could lead to fines. Armed with this information, David decided to attend the next HOA meeting. He knew Karen would be there, probably running it as usual. He planned to reveal the truth in front of everyone, leaving her no room to twist the story. The night of the meeting arrived. The community gathered in a small hall near the park. Chairs were lined up neatly, and neighbors chatted while waiting for things to begin. Karen stood at the front, shuffling papers with her usual air of importance. When David entered, she glanced at him with a smug smile, as if daring him to speak up. As the meeting went on, Karen spoke about lawn care rules and fence heights. People listened politely, though many looked bored. When the time came for open discussion, David raised his hand. I have something important to share with everyone, he said clearly. The room quieted. All eyes turned toward him. Karen frowned but forced a smile. Of course, David. Go ahead. David stood up. I moved here to enjoy peace and respect. But my privacy has been invaded again and again. Someone has been using my pool without permission, even in the middle of the night. I tried to handle it quietly, but it has not stopped. So I want everyone to see the truth. He held up his phone and connected it to the screen at the front of the hall. The video began to play. Gasps spread across the room as neighbors saw Karen, their HOA leader, climbing into David's pool at night, laughing and floating as if nothing was wrong. The footage was clear. There was no mistake. Karen's face turned pale. She stood frozen, papers slipping from her hands. For once, she had no quick excuse ready. The neighbors began whispering to each other. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others looked angry. Tom crossed his arms with a satisfied nod. David spoke firmly. This is not about a pool. This is about respecting each other's property. If this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. I will not allow it anymore. The room fell silent. Everyone waited to see what Karen would say. For the first time, she seemed truly cornered. The game had turned, and now it was David's move. The room stayed silent after David's video finished playing. The once confident Karen stood frozen, her lips pressed tight as whispers filled the hall. The members of the HOA looked at her with mixed emotions: shock, disappointment, and even anger. For years, Karen had acted as if she was the voice of authority, but now the truth was out in the open. One man in the back broke the silence. So all this time, while you were telling us to follow every rule, you were sneaking into someone else's yard. His voice was sharp, carrying the frustration many had felt but never spoken. Another woman added, "You scolded me last month for having flowers outside the color guideline, yet you think it is fine to break into David's pool? That is not leadership. That is hypocrisy." Karen's face grew red. She tried to gather her papers, but her hands shook. Finally, she spoke in a defensive tone. "You are all misunderstanding this. I was only making sure the pool was safe. Sometimes community members need to check on each other's property for the greater good." The room erupted with disbelief. Neighbors shook their heads. One even laughed bitterly. Safe? At midnight? Floating on a pool chair? Do you think we are fools? David stayed calm. He did not raise his voice or argue further. The evidence spoke louder than any words. He simply looked at the others and said, "All I want is respect for my home. Nothing more." The HOA president, a quiet man named Mr. Lewis who often let Karen run things, finally cleared his throat. "This is serious. Karen, your behavior goes against the very rules we are supposed to uphold. Trespassing is unacceptable. The HOA cannot ignore this." Karen turned sharply to him. "You cannot remove me. I have served this board for years. I make sure this neighborhood looks perfect. Without me, it will fall apart." But her words fell flat. The neighbors had seen the truth, and her authority was crumbling. Mr. Lewis stood firm. "This board is about trust. We cannot lead if we break the same rules we enforce. I will call a vote right now." Hands went up across the room. One by one, neighbors voted for Karen's removal from the HOA board. Only Karen raised her own hand in protest. The majority was clear. Her reign as the self-proclaimed guardian of the neighborhood was over. Karen sat down heavily, her face pale. She had lost the power she used to control others. For the first time, she was no longer the loudest voice in the room. David left the meeting with a calm smile. He had not only defended his own space but had also given the entire neighborhood a chance to stand up for themselves. Many neighbors came to him afterward, shaking his hand and thanking him. "You did what we could not," one woman said. "You showed us we do not have to let her push us around." For a few days, peace returned to David's life. He enjoyed his pool without worry, reading books by the water and swimming under the sun. The air felt lighter, and the constant feeling of being watched had vanished. But David knew Karen well enough to understand that she was not someone who gave up easily. Losing the HOA position would not end her desire for control. Sure enough, small signs of trouble began again. One morning, David found his trash cans knocked over, though no wind had blown that night. Another day, he discovered strange chalk markings near his driveway. It was nothing serious, but it was suspicious. He had no proof, yet his instincts told him Karen was behind it. Then came the letter. Folded neatly and slipped under his door, it had no name on it, but the handwriting was unmistakable. The words were short and sharp: "You embarrassed me. You will regret it." David read the note twice. There was no mistake, Karen had written it. For a moment, anger bubbled inside him, but then he calmed himself. If Karen thought intimidation would make him back down, she was wrong. He had handled worse before, and he would not let her destroy his peace. Instead of reacting, David decided to strengthen his defenses. He installed better locks on his gates, added more lights, and even connected his security cameras to his phone for live alerts. If Karen tried anything again, he would catch her in the act. But what David did not expect was the change happening among the neighbors. After the HOA meeting, people started seeing Karen differently. Where once they had obeyed her strict rules, now they avoided her or ignored her lectures. She was no longer respected. In fact, some even whispered about how strange it was that she had spent so much time in someone else's pool. Her reputation was ruined. This only fueled Karen's bitterness. She began walking past David's house more often, glaring at his yard, her eyes filled with quiet anger. Neighbors noticed her muttering under her breath, but no one dared to ask what she was saying. One evening, as David relaxed on his porch, Tom came by to check on him. "I hear Karen is still causing trouble," Tom said with concern. David nodded. "She left me a threatening note. I am not worried, but I know she has not accepted what happened." Tom sighed. "She never does. Karen hates losing. But you did the right thing. If she tries anything else, the whole neighborhood is watching now. She is not untouchable anymore." David smiled at his neighbor's support. It felt good to know he was no longer alone in this battle. Before, Karen had ruled through fear and pressure. Now, people had seen her weakness, and they were ready to resist her control. Still, David stayed alert. He knew Karen's pride would not let her rest until she tried one last move. He had to be ready, not just for himself but to prove once and for all that respect could not be forced or stolen. Days passed, then weeks. Life almost felt normal again, but David never let his guard down. Every night, he checked his cameras before sleeping. Every morning, he walked around the yard to make sure everything was in place. Then one night, while the neighborhood slept under the quiet glow of the streetlights, the motion alert on David's phone lit up. He opened the feed quickly, and there she was, Karen standing by his pool once more, but this time she was not swimming. She was holding something in her hand, staring into the water with a look of frustration and desperation. David narrowed his eyes. The time had come. Karen was making her next move, and he was ready to face her again. The glow from David's phone screen lit up his face as he watched the live camera feed. Karen stood in his backyard, staring into the pool as if it had betrayed her. In her hand, she held a small flashlight, the beam flickering across the water's surface. Her shoulders were tense, and her jaw was tight. This was not the relaxed, carefree Karen who used to float on his pool chair. This was someone who had lost control and did not know how to get it back. David stayed calm. He knew rushing outside in anger would only create chaos. Instead, he quietly walked to his porch light switch and flipped it on. Bright light flooded the yard. On the camera, he saw Karen freeze like a deer caught in headlights. She turned toward the house, her eyes wide. A moment later, David stepped outside. He did not shout. He did not threaten. His voice was steady. "Karen, you should not be here. Leave now." Karen's lips trembled, but then she forced a smile, trying to recover her usual confidence. "I was just checking the water. I thought maybe there was a leak. This neighborhood cannot afford property problems." David looked straight at her. "You lost your place on the HOA board. You have no right to be here. I have cameras, and I have recordings of this moment too. Go home before you make this worse." For a moment, Karen stood frozen. Then, with a huff, she turned and marched toward the gate. She fumbled with the latch, finally pushing it open and storming out without another word. The night fell silent again, the only sound being the soft ripple of the pool water. David sighed, rubbing his temples. He knew this would not be the last of her antics. But he also knew he had handled it the right way, calm, firm, and without losing control. The next morning, he decided it was time to take things further. Karen needed to understand that she could not keep crossing boundaries. He gathered all the video clips, including the most recent one, and organized them neatly. Then he wrote a clear statement to the HOA, explaining the repeated trespassing, the threatening letter, and the latest incident. At the next HOA meeting, David stood again. This time, the room was already buzzing with whispers. People had heard about Karen's late-night visits. Some had even noticed her wandering the streets at odd hours. David presented his evidence calmly. He showed the new footage, where Karen stood in his yard holding the flashlight. The room filled with gasps and murmurs. Mr. Lewis, the HOA president, shook his head with disappointment. "This has gone far enough. Karen, you were already removed from the board. Now you are breaking the law. Trespassing cannot be tolerated." Karen sat stiffly in her chair, her face pale. Her hands gripped the armrests tightly. "This is not fair. You are all against me because of him. He is new here. He does not understand our community." But her words no longer had power. The neighbors who once feared her now saw her clearly. They remembered her scolding them for grass that was too long, flowers that were the wrong color, or cars parked slightly off-center. They realized she had used rules to control others while ignoring them herself. A woman stood up from the back. "Karen, you told me to paint my mailbox 3 times because it was the wrong shade of white. But here you are breaking into someone's pool at night. You lost all respect." Another neighbor added, "We all followed your rules while you ignored them. Enough is enough." The HOA board agreed to take official action. A letter would be filed against Karen, warning her that any further trespassing or harassment would lead to police involvement. David felt relief wash over him. At last, there was a system backing him up. But Karen did not leave quietly. After the meeting ended, she approached David outside, her voice low but sharp. "You may have embarrassed me again, but this is not over. You think the neighborhood is on your side, but wait. People forget quickly. One mistake from you, and they will turn." David looked at her calmly. "Karen, the only one making mistakes here is you. I am not your enemy. I just want peace." If you keep pushing, you will only hurt yourself more. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she turned and walked away without another word. Over the next few weeks, life slowly improved. Neighbors grew friendlier with David, inviting him to barbecues and greeting him warmly. They respected how he had stood up for himself without losing his temper. Tom often stopped by to chat, telling David that the whole community felt freer now that Karen was no longer controlling everything. Still, David kept his cameras on. He knew Karen's pride was deep, and pride like that did not vanish overnight. One rainy evening, as David sat inside reading a book, he received another alert from his phone. His heart jumped as he opened the feed. This time, it was not Karen in his yard. It was two local kids, running past the pool before quickly climbing back out. They seemed harmless, just curious about the water. David chuckled to himself, relieved it was not another midnight drama. He reminded himself that not every noise meant trouble. But the real test came the following week. David returned home late from work and found a letter taped to his front door. Expecting another angry note, he tore it open carefully. To his surprise, the words were different this time. I am sorry. I went too far. I lost myself when I lost control of the HOA. The pool reminded me of something I could never have, and I let my jealousy guide me. I should not have treated you this way. I will leave you alone now. It was signed, simply, Karen. David read the note twice, unsure what to think. Was it genuine? Or was it just another trick? He decided not to overanalyze. Instead, he kept it as proof. If Karen truly meant it, then maybe peace had finally arrived. If not, he was still prepared. The next few days passed quietly. Karen stopped walking past his house. The neighborhood meetings continued smoothly without her interruptions. Slowly, the balance of the community shifted into something healthier and more respectful. For David, the pool once again became a place of peace. He could swim freely, read by the water, and invite neighbors over without worry. Yet, deep down, he remained cautious. He knew Karen's pride, and he knew how unpredictable people could be when they felt cornered. One evening, as the sun set and the water glowed orange from the fading light, David leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "Respect is earned, not forced. And peace is worth protecting." But even as he relaxed, one thought lingered: was Karen truly finished, or was this just the calm before another storm? For weeks after receiving Karen's letter of apology, the neighborhood felt calmer than it had in years. David noticed that people seemed more relaxed during walks and meetings. The heavy air of constant criticism was gone, and neighbors began focusing on enjoying their homes rather than worrying about breaking some rule. Children played freely, and families decorated their gardens without fear of another lecture. David, too, felt the difference. His backyard pool once again became his private place of peace. He spent mornings sipping coffee by the water, afternoons swimming laps, and evenings reading under the glow of soft lights. It was exactly what he had imagined when he bought the house. Still, he kept the cameras on and stayed alert. Trust was not something Karen had earned back, and David knew better than to lower his guard too soon. Karen kept her distance. She no longer walked past his house daily, and her once sharp voice was rarely heard around the neighborhood. Some said she stayed inside most of the time, embarrassed by how the community had turned against her. Others said she was plotting a way to return to power. David did not spend much time worrying about it, but he never forgot how far she had gone before. One Saturday afternoon, as David was tending to his garden, Tom walked over. The older neighbor leaned on the fence and smiled. You know, things feel different now. People are free to live without being scolded every other day. You did more than protect your pool. You gave everyone courage. David smiled back. I only wanted peace. If it helped others too, then I am glad. Tom nodded. But be careful. People like Karen do not change easily. Sometimes they wait for the right moment. The warning stayed in David's mind. He knew Tom was right. Karen's apology had been written in shaky words, but her pride was not something that disappeared overnight. That moment came sooner than expected. One late evening, as David prepared dinner, his phone buzzed with a camera alert. He opened the live feed, expecting to see nothing more than a passing animal or a delivery driver. Instead, the screen showed Karen standing at the edge of his pool again. David's heart sank, but he stayed calm. This time, Karen was not swimming or relaxing. She stood still, looking down at the water with tired eyes. Her shoulders drooped, and she held nothing in her hands. It was not the same bold trespass from before. She looked more like someone lost in thought, struggling with herself. David stepped outside slowly. Karen, he called. His voice was firm but not angry. Why are you here again? Karen turned, startled. Her face was pale, and her expression carried no confidence. I do not know. I was walking and ended up here. I thought about how peaceful it feels by the water. I should not have come. I am sorry. David studied her carefully. For the first time, she did not sound defensive or proud. She sounded tired. You cannot keep coming here, Karen. This is my home. You need to let go of whatever makes you think this place belongs to you. Karen lowered her gaze. When I lost the board, I lost control of everything. For years, I believed that controlling others gave me respect. But it only gave me enemies. When I saw your pool, it reminded me of what I could not have. I wanted that peace, but I went about it the wrong way. For a long moment, the two stood in silence. The only sound was the soft splash of water moving in the breeze. Finally, David spoke. Peace is not something you take from others. It is something you build yourself. If you keep looking into other people's lives, you will never find it. Karen nodded slowly. I know. And I know I have lost everyone's trust. I cannot undo what I did, but I will leave you alone now. David believed her tone, but he also knew that actions spoke louder than words. I hope you mean that. Because next time, I will not handle this quietly. You need to respect boundaries. Karen gave a weak smile. I understand. She turned and walked out of the yard, her steps heavy and slow. The following weeks confirmed her words. Karen no longer appeared near David's property. She kept to herself, and though neighbors rarely saw her, they heard fewer complaints, fewer demands, and fewer arguments. It seemed she had finally accepted that her power was gone. David continued to live peacefully, and his relationship with the community grew stronger. He invited families over for barbecues, let children swim in his pool under supervision, and shared laughs with neighbors who once lived in constant fear of Karen's rules. People respected him not just for standing up to her, but for how he had handled everything with patience and dignity. One afternoon, during a neighborhood picnic, Mr. Lewis stood and raised his voice. I want to thank David. He showed us that respect is not about rules written on paper. It is about how we treat each other. Because of him, this community feels stronger. Applause filled the park. David smiled humbly, not seeking praise but appreciating the warmth of his neighbors. Tom leaned over and whispered, "You see? This is what real leadership looks like. Not control, not fear, but respect." David nodded. He did not need a title or a board position. All he needed was the peace of knowing he had stood firm against what was wrong. As the sun set that evening, David returned home and sat by his pool. The water shimmered under the orange light, calm and beautiful. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, feeling the peace he had fought to protect. For the first time since moving in, he knew it was truly his home. Not because of the house, not because of the pool, but because he had earned the trust of his community and defended the respect he deserved. And as for Karen, she had learned the hard way that power without respect leads only to regret.